Now, I'm a big podcast fan, and hardcore history is one of my favorites because it really dives deep into all the nuances of history. On today's show, we're going to do a hardcore history dive into offensive linemen for the upcoming Boston College season. All of this and more on today's Locked On Boston College.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Boston College. I am your host, AJ Black. I'm joined again for Mondays with Mitch Wolfe. Mitch, how's it going?
It's going good. Excited to dive into the hog mollies, as some people call them. BC's obviously offensive line U, so it'll be interesting to talk about how this group is going to perform in the coming season.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the biggest questions heading into 2022 is this offensive line. You have 4 new players and you have Christian Mahogany. And I think it begs a lot of questions. I know you have done a lot of research, and I think our fans want to know more about this group. So what have you kind of looked into? What have you found out?
So I was looking at kind of the depth chart, or at least the one that I have, and kind of thinking about the players coming in. And I was thinking that, especially compared to the last few years, like this group is very inexperienced. So I went back and checked and kind of did some math as to how many returning starts every offensive line group had since Steve Addazio took over in 2013. And it turns out that this group actually has the fewest returning starts as a collective since 2015. In 2015, there were only 14 starts returning. So I think the player was Harris Williams, who had missed the previous season due to injury. So he was the only player coming back that year that had any starting experience. And then this year, it's kind of similar. You have Christian Mahogany, who's been a starter for 2 years, but he's the only player that's coming back that has meaningful starting experience. Ozzy Tropilo started 1 game at right guard. Jack Conley started a few games at left tackle. But, if you look back a few years, going into the 2021 season, there were 125 total combined starts returning. In 2020, there were 60. 2019 dips down to 43, but in 2018, there were 130 starts returning. So, a lot of experience there. And I think you can make the argument that of all the positions, experience matters the most for offensive line, because even though it's such a physical position, knowing how your opponent is going to attack you in that physical way and being able to understand how to react to it and how to counter against it is arguably the most important part of that position.
So how concerning is this? I think you hear fans asking, are we going to win more than 7 games? Are we going to win more than 8? Is this going to be the Achilles heel for BC football this year?
I think it's possible. I think Achilles heel might be a little dramatic. Okay. I think I don't even think it'll be a weakness, but if the quarterback and receiver play are both very good, the running game is good, the defense is good. The offensive line might be average. So kind of similar to last year, but maybe there isn't a great step forward, which makes sense considering you're losing a bunch of experience and guys who, granted, they didn't live up to the expectations we set for them, but a lot of them are on NFL teams now. So that's something to, take note of. And, I think it's good for this offensive line group that a lot of the guys are young. You have guys like Durstine and Mahogany who are, seasoned veterans, even though Durstine hasn't played him much, but he's been around a long time. But then you have guys like Conley, Kendall, and Tropilo who, you want to see them develop chemistry as a group, guys like Zion and Tyler and Ben Petrula and Alec Lindstrom did over the last few years.
And, you're looking at this group and they have a new offensive coordinator. They have a new offensive line coach. In your opinion, having a new offensive line coach, especially on the heels of Matt Applebaum, who I know a lot of BC fans weren't big fans of because, the offensive line struggled. Is there a possibility that could actually help this group, having a seasoned offensive line coach like Googs in there?
I think it will help and I think that, and I'm not saying that Applebaum did a bad job or even that this was the reason why he didn't do as good of a job, but I think getting a guy like Googs, or even this would kind of work for any coach, honestly, but getting a coach that is working with you in the building, in person, from the start I think that's really important for offensive line, again, because that, you can kind of take past set reps and stuff by yourself, but you need that physical engagement with another person when you're practicing football. And for the offensive line, obviously that's super important. So I think getting that hands-on experience in person, because like you think back to 2020 when Halfley and Signetti and Applebaum came in, like it was all, virtual basically because of COVID. So I think, starting out with that physical aspect, and when we talked with Christian Mahogany, he started talking about all the things that Gooch is helping him to do, because he's like seeing it firsthand. He's like, okay, like you need to, step your foot this way. You need to strike your hand in this direction or at this angle, or put it here to be most effective. And I think that having that it's tactile experience is going to be really important for these guys.
All right, Mitch, in just a moment, we're going to chat, Mitch and I, about the depth chart and look at the starters, the backups, getting all the nuances of offensive line that you're going to want to know about. But first of all, let me tell you about my friends at Built Bar. I love brownies, but you know what I love more? Brownie batter. Sometimes I eat half the batter just while I'm making the brownies. Imagine if you could lick that brownie spatula clean and get some protein in. Well, you're in luck, because Built has a new creation, and this one is even better than ever. The brownie batter puff. You heard me right. This puff takes protein bars to a whole new level, and they're available right now at Built Bar. I'm telling you, Built Bar is changing the game right now. They've had some delicious flavors over the last couple of months, and the brownie batter might be the best. With 140 calories, 17 grams of protein, and 7 grams of sugar, brownie batter puffs are the only perfect pick-me-up for any day. And as I've always said, I have mine around 2:30 as I'm driving home from work. It is delicious, it is filled with protein, and it keeps me going when I need that energy to make my last push. And they are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. So go to Built.com to get brownie puffs now. And when you do, use LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Again, use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off any order at Built.com. This is Locked On Boston College, and thank you for making us your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. So this is our big, bad offensive line episode. Many of you have asked about it. We're talking about it, and I couldn't think of anyone better to talk about offensive line than with Mitch Wolfe. And it's a perfect segue. We're not doing our Coach Googs of the Week, tweet of the week, because he's busy out there in recruiting land right now. I don't see much out of him. But we're looking at this offensive line, and we've had Christian Mahogany on, and we'll be looking to get some of the other offensive linemen on before the end of the summer. But Mitch, talk a little bit about some of these guys. What stands out to with some of these players?
So I'll kind of start off the easy one. So Christian Mahogany is obviously the lone returning starter, right guard, and I think he's going to be the rock upon which this offensive line is built. Like, he is a really solid player. I really loved watching his tape. He's got some like a little few like nuanced things to work on this season, but he's talked about it, and I'm sure Gooch is going to help him with that. So that's great to see. I think he's going to be instrumental in getting the run game going, especially if they're going to lean more on gap power schemes that I anticipate them doing. Across from at guard is Finn Durstine, who was kind of one of the jewels of a Steve Addazio recruiting class a while ago, and really just hasn't seen the field very much so far in his career. I think he's only taken like 59 snaps on offense, which has been kind of a disappointment. And I think you and I were surprised that he's actually stuck around this long. We kind of thought he might transfer at some point, but he's back for, I think it's his 5th year this year. Could be his 6th, honestly.
And I think he has another year of eligibility.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yes, because of the COVID year. So he's going to start, I assume, this year at left guard. And I have an article coming out soon I don't love the title exactly, but it's what I've titled Last Chance Players, where it's guys, it's like, all right, like you need to kind of make your mark on this roster, and prove your worth. And that's kind of where Finn Durstine sits right now. Is he's a guy that you're kind of penciling in to start, and he's got to do something. He's got to be a stalwart left guard. And I think that Mahogany and Durstine are going to be instrumental in helping this new center, Drew Kendall, who, again, another prize recruit. He's still kind of getting his body ready for college football, as he's a little undersized. But the thing about undersized centers, especially early in their careers, you want to surround them with bigger guards that can help them with double teams. You see like the team like the Eagles do this. Jason Kelsey is one of the smallest centers in the NFL, even though he's a much older player, but they've surround him with guards that are like 6'3", 330 pounds or more. So just get huge guys that can help them out when they're, wanting to run inside. So I think Kendall's going to, luckily, I don't think the early opponents are the toughest challenges, but I think he's going to, have some bumps in the road early on, as any true freshman or redshirt freshman would. So he might have a few bad reps here in the early season, but by the end of the year, I expect him to be a really solid contributor on this offensive line.
Yeah, I know a lot of folks he's one of the most talked about commitments under Jeff Hafley so far. He was the one that was thinking of going to Michigan. I still remember Joe Sullivan's tweet, Joe Sullivan, the former director of personnel, where he had the Undertaker gif when Kendall's flipped because he had earlier that day, I believe, committed to Michigan and then flipped to BC at that night. So he's a big one. And at center, he got to learn from the best under Alec Lindstrom. It'll be interesting to see 6'4", 283 this year. And
I anticipate that weight is probably going to be closer, at least listing. It'll be closer to 300 by the time they release like the final fall roster.
Eat a lot of hamburgers this summer.
Exactly. Which that's why I really wish I could have been offensive lineman, just because you get told to eat as much as you can, but I digress. Speaking of, the tackles are a little interesting because, on one side you do have Ozzy Tropilo, who again, very highly touted recruit, legacy guy at BC, played a little guard last year, but they had the experienced guys there, so he didn't need to do that much. And I thought he was pretty solid in his reps at guard. I think that his future is at tackle just because of how tall he is. He's 6'7", 6'8". I think he's going to play right tackle this year, and I'm intrigued to see how that goes. I think he's going to have a really good year, just given the flashes he's shown in limited time last year. So I'm really excited to watch him. And on the other side is Jack Conley, who we've talked about extensively on this podcast, and it's kind of this is just a wait and see thing. Like if he improves, great. If he doesn't, then they're going to figure something else out, because the bad Conley reps last year were some of the worst offensive line play that I've seen. So it's really an all or nothing proposition. And I think he can he has the size, he can move. It's just getting the technique down is really the important thing for him.
Yeah. And going back to Tropilo, I think what I've seen and heard from him is like the buzz around, Kendall, and even last year there was some buzz. I mean, most of it brought on by Hafley about Jack Conley, but I had heard from some scouts that have kind of seen him play that Ozzy Tropilo is probably the best offensive lineman they have on the roster.
Yeah, I would totally believe that. And I think especially at offensive line, I think, and I say this a lot, but I think that pedigree, that those bloodlines of having family members that play the position, especially like you see it with the Lindstroms, obviously. So I think having that bloodline is really helpful. And I think that's why he's going to be a really good player for BC this year and moving forward. And
so those are our starters. Now looking at the backups, I think you wanted to talk a little bit about that. And I can give you some of my analysis of who I have if you're stuck.
Yeah. So, I mean, I anticipate the two Kevins being this backup tackles, Klein and Pine. I'm not sure exactly which one is going to be where, but I believe Pine was the one that was very highly recruited and hasn't really had a lot of buzz around him. Am I correct in that, or am I
correct?
Mistaken?
Yeah, Kevin Pine. I'm not even sure Kevin Pine's going to be on the backup crew next year. Okay. He like when I watched him during the spring game, he was with the threes.
Okay.
So he could fall, but it depends on where they're at. I mean, Kevin Klein, who all I can think of is the actor with that name. I've heard a lot about. I think he could absolutely kind of climb up the roster a little bit. And
I think that if a guy like Durstine struggles, I could see Klein sliding in there, because he's a little bit bigger, but he could slide into guard no problem. Yep. And then the other guy, I think Otto Hess is a year younger, but I think he's probably a back at this point.
Yep.
Flareon Rastemi is kind of a senior, like an elder statesman among this group. He's been here a long time. I think he's kind of a backup interior guy, probably backup center, just given his size limitations. And I know they've been moving Dwayne Alec back and forth between center and defensive tackle. So I'm not exactly sure where he's going to end up, but he'll be a backup.
He'll be the backup center.
Okay. Gotcha.
He'll be the backup center. And Jackson Ness is the other name to watch.
Right. The converted defensive end. So yeah,
he'll be a backup guard.
Okay. And then your guy, Elijah Krajnovic, could be a backup as well. Or I think he'll be one of the primary backups.
If he can get his technique down, he's going to be nasty.
Yeah.
6'7", 330 right now.
Yeah, he's another one where I could see them kind of, giving him some early reps at guard, especially like in the early games, that if they turn to blowouts, get him some reps at guard, just kind of have him wade into the water some baby steps. So where your technique isn't, you're not in as many one-on-one matchups where you can be exploited. So you can kind of protect him by putting him at guard. So, and then you've got all the freshmen, and I'll see if I can get the, so you got Jack Funk, Jude Bowery, and I believe it's Noah Kahapea now. It was Clifford, and I think he changed his name.
Yeah. Okay. That one always confused me. So if you follow us on BC Bulletin, you would have seen, and I had Noah Clifford on the show back in March, I think it was. He's changed his last name. It's now Noah Kahapea. So it's the same guy if you're ever looking it up. Now, I think what's also interesting, and this is kind of a me thing, is that this is where the roster is right now, but it clearly looks like to me that Halfley and company are looking for some depth in the transfer portal. They just offered a guard from Charlotte.
Oh, yes, right.
And they've offered someone from Northern Colorado, someone from Vanderbilt, and they haven't landed any of them. So I'm guessing
did they bring in a guy from Lehigh, or did I imagine? Am I imagining
he
that?
is, but he's a walk-on.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
As preferred walk-on. These guys, I think, they're getting for, scholarship roles. And I think just based on the fact that they're not getting any movement with them, I'm guessing it's more of a depth piece. You know what I mean? Like these guys are not going to transfer to BC to be a backup. I think they're just thinking like, oh, let's offer them and see if they will. Because if they offer them to start or an opportunity to start, I think they'd probably get a little bit more leeway with some of these guys.
Yeah, I don't think we talked about it on the podcast, but a few months ago, you mentioned Anthony Steen to me, who was at Vanderbilt.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
And he entered the transfer portal, and then he ended up at Alabama.
Yeah, I saw that one.
Yeah. Yes. So they're definitely out on that one.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that the good news is that if there is, well, it's a little bit of good and bad news, but if there is an injury, there are a number of competent backups that can come up and even play multiple positions. I don't think, obviously none of those guys have a ton of experience either, but it's not like if one guy goes down, maybe it's center be a little bit of an issue, but it's not like if one guy goes down, everything's going to fall off a cliff. Yeah.
And I think as we're talking, my thought is we're talking about Jack Conley. If he struggles, I imagine if he can't do it, Kevin Klein will be the one to take his spot.
I would be intrigued to see if they would flip Ozzy Tropilo to left and then either move Conley to right or just give him like a break and then let somebody else try a right tackle just to see if Tropilo can play there in the future. Yeah. But that would be something to keep an eye on.
But I'm also on board with, as you just said, like younger guys thrown in. It's an S show,
Yeah, like and I'm not sure if we're gonna get deep into this on this episode, but luckily I think that or at least the first 3 games they are not some of the toughest opponents in terms of like pass rushers. So like you have Rutgers at home, Virginia Tech's going through a big rebuilding phase, and then Maine. So you've kind of got 3 weeks to get your feet wet, and then you go on the road to Florida State, which will be it's not the Florida State of the last few years, but they still have 1 or 2 really good pass rushers. It probably can't be worse than it was last year when Jermaine Johnson and Keir Thomas just absolutely wrecked shop for 4 quarters.
Right. Yeah. So in a moment, we're going to talk, Mitch and I, and wrap up our conversation with offensive lines. Mitch wants to talk a little bit about, where this line is at and kind of give his final thoughts on that. But before we do that, Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questions and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. So save time and money when using Rock Auto. You can save up to 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts. Rock Auto is a family business, so you're working with someone who loves their customers, and they've been doing it for over 20 years. They're reliably low for every customer. It's so easy to use. All you do is put your make and model in, boom, everything they have will come right up for you. So go up to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and write Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box? So they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're wrapping up things here on Locked On Boston College. And if you're looking for some more Locked On greatness, you need to check out Locked On Celtics with John Corrales. as I've said before, he's the reason I got into the podcast game. He's one of my idols. He's talking all about that Heat and Celtics series, and he is an absolute expert. He does great work in the written world. I actually just saw him on Channel 5 and WCVB up here doing the pregame show for the Celtics. So check out Locked On Celtics wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Mitch, we're talking offensive linemen here. What are some of your last thoughts you want to go talk about?
So I'll say the first thing is that things I want to see that got worked on this offseason, and I want to see where the biggest improvements can be made in 2022. And the biggest thing is footwork and set points, hand placement a little bit, but less so. They were pretty solid at that last year. And I saw this a lot with Jack Conley, and of the issues that Christian Mahogany had, I thought this was where he had the most problems was just staying light on your feet. You know, you want to kind of be playing the balls of your feet. And I would say that like Mahogany at least like leads with his heels a little too much. So you want to see him play a little bit lighter on those to move a little easier. And then Conley with set points, and the set point is basically like, where are you, when you're an offensive line, where are you kicking out of your stance, and like where exactly is your landmark? And I thought Conley had a lot of issues of kind of just not knowing where he's supposed to go. And then his opponents would just easily take advantage of it, whether he overset or underset, going around or inside of him. So I'd want to see that improve this season. I'd also want to see, and this was something that I was surprised that BC had consistent issues with, was they had a lot of issues like where if they did like a full line slide protection where they would slide the line left or right, they would have a lot of mistakes with that in terms of like they would misread the defense, which was when you have a guy like Alec Lindstrom as the center, and then guys like Phil Dracovic and Dennis Grosel who have played a lot of football. If they're making a lot of those mistakes and not making the proper call, that was pretty surprising. So ideally that would be improved. And I think in order to help this team, for the last few years, we saw the offensive, in terms of the run game, it was a lot of zone running style. And I think you're able to do that with, ideally you want more athletic offensive line, but you also want smarter offensive line who are very experienced. Like, again, like I said earlier, you want to know where you need to be going and how to react to your opponent. And obviously these guys don't have as much experience. So I think if they shift to more gap style runs, which are power, counter, pin and pull pitches, that kind of stuff. You just say, okay, you block that guy, you go this way, and that's it. It's a little simpler. And I think you might see that a little more earlier in the season. And then as they get more comfortable, you say, okay, now we'll introduce more zone style runs. And I looked into McNulty and Guge's lines or when they were at their last few stops, and I would say that they've leaned a little bit more towards gap running, but they've definitely been more balanced than they were under Signetti last year, who was almost exclusively zone running. So I think that that's something that'll be something to keep an eye on during the season. I
think it's important too. Like, it sounds like the last couple of years, it's a more complex system.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And at the collegiate level, it doesn't hurt to make it simple.
No,
right?
no, and exactly. And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that, I think that because they had all the experience, they're like, all right, like we're going to, try to do as much complex stuff as we can because we can. And doing that for the sake of doing it is maybe a little excessive at times. And I think that kind of led to some of the issues. But I think that, I think we've talked about this a lot, is like, just, don't rely so much on like hitting precision intermediate and deep throws. Let guys like Zay and Jalen make plays after the catch. Take the easy open layups, like, and lean into like some gimmicks. And watching some of the Notre Dame offenses last year when McNulty was there, like it's a lot more collegey. Like there's a lot more simpler stuff that it's like, all right, like let's just have a quick throw that gets 5 yards and like let's just stay on schedule. And I think I think we're going to see that a lot this year. And I think that's going to help the offense overall, and especially it'll help acclimate this offensive line. And then as the season goes on, once you're comfortable with the basics, then you can start adding stuff to your repertoire.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing this group. I'm going to be at practice a lot this summer. My schedule is definitely going to open up so I can check them out. Mm-hmm. But they're going to be, I think, of any group on this team, they're the ones with the biggest question marks about them. But also, I think there's a lot of talent there. I think they could evolve into something even better than what we've seen. And I think there's excitement, but there's hesitation. And that's what makes them interesting, I think.
Yeah, definitely like cautious optimism, because, and like with the offensive line they've had the last years, it's like you have like very high expectations. Then when they don't meet that, you get disappointed. And so I think that, not having as high of expectations with this offensive line, at least might give you the perception. It's like, okay, they actually performed better than I expected, which, it could in a vacuum be worse than it was last few years. But you're like, okay, like these are young guys, they're going to be growing. They're going to be bumps in the road, but maybe ideally as the season goes on, you see those bumps and those mistakes get fewer and fewer.
Mitch, it's always a pleasure having you on. And where can people follow you on social media?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE on Twitter. I will probably not be on next week because I will be in my bachelor party. So I am going to be otherwise indisposed.
Yeah, I was going to say good luck to that. I hope you have a good time there. I was also going to be indisposed too. So I get a show off a month, and that's going to be I don't even know if we're supposed to have it, but there will not be a show on Monday because I'm going to be in West Virginia with my family. So burning couches. No, I'm just kidding. But both Mitch and I won't be there. So we will see you in 2 weeks, Mitch, and we have plenty of time to talk about BC football as we get marched towards the start of the season. You can follow me on Twitter at AJBlack_BC. On tomorrow's show, we'll dive into the AD hunt and everything else that's going on in BC athletics. See you again soon. Take care, everyone.